everybody. Today we're going to talk about Gestalt language learning. And I know this is a super polarizing topic, so there's probably many of you who are like, oh my gosh, here we go again, where there might be others of you who are like, heck yeah, Leah, let's get into it. But before we dive into research, before we do anything about what do we do about it in therapy, how do we handle it, all those sorts of questions that people might have, let's do a little defining of the terms. After all, I am a speech language pathologist. I love semantics. So first step is to define, what does Gestalt even mean? And then of course we have to talk about echoes and we have to talk about scripting. So buckle up and let's get going. Let's start with the word Gestalt. Gestalt means an organized whole that is perceived as more than the sum of its parts. So something that is organized, perceived more than the sum of its parts. So more than what kind of meets the eye, so to speak. What is echoing? Echoing can either be immediate or delayed. So immediate echoing means that I hear something, I repeat it back immediately. Versus delayed echoing means that I heard something maybe an hour ago, a day ago, a month ago, and I might have heard it from a person or a TV show or a movie or wherever I heard it from. And I will echo that phrase or that word or multiple phrases. I will echo that back at a later time. So immediate, I hear it, I echo. Delayed, I hear it, but I don't echo it until later. And then what is scripting? So scripting is where we have something that we're going to say that we're going to use in maybe very specific times, or maybe we use it for conveying a very specific message. And oftentimes you will hear that a script is nothing more than a delayed echo, or it even could be an immediate echo. It's just a form of echoing. Here's where I'm going to challenge that thought just a little bit, because we all use scripts all the time and they're not always an echo. So any of you who go to Starbucks to get your coffee in the morning, you have a script that you are going to use. Good morning, may I have a grande soy no foam latte, please? And that's a script. And you're going to say that exact same thing every single time you walk into that Starbucks. So a script is just something that we use over and over. We say it pretty much exactly the same way. You might even use the same intonation every time you use it. But just so that you know, a script sometimes gets called an echo. And yes, scripts can be echoes, but scripts are not always echoes. We have scripts for lots of different things. We might have learned that script. So, hi, good morning, how are you? That's totally a script. Do we actually want to know how the person is doing? Maybe, maybe not. But that is definitely a script. We were taught that script and we use it constantly. We use scripts all the time. We're going to get into that more later. But now we have the terms. What is Gestalt? What is a script? What is echoing? So hopefully that definition, those definitions kind of help at least get us on the right page to move forward in the rest of this learning. Alrighty. So then what is a Gestalt language learner? So Gestalt language learner is essentially a person, typically we're talking about autistic people, an autistic person who does not follow what we would consider our neurotypical developmental pattern of language learning. So neurotypical pattern of language learning is what you would think about with a child who learns a word, then they learn some more words, and they gain lots and lots of nouns. Once they have nouns, they start adding verbs. So you're looking at a kid who around 12 months of age is going to say their first word. Around 2 years of age, when they should have about 200 to 300 words in their vocabulary, that's when they're going to start putting words and phrases, or words together, words together. So mommy, no, daddy, go, ball, more, those sorts of things. So they start with one by one words. We're pointing to things we can label. We've seen babies that can do this. And then the kid starts putting simple phrases together. So it's usually 2 words. After that, we start to see around the age of 3. So again, kids vary and we give them a little bit of variability. We start to see what are called simple sentences. So a child starts saying, yes, more, please. I want more. Give me ball. Those sorts of things. And they might still be leaving out words. So notice how they might not always say the articles. It might not always be grammatically correct, but they're starting to use what are called simple sentences. So a little bit and expanding their utterances. So this is what we would call our neurotypical language development. However, our Gestalt language learners, so remember, an organized whole, that's what Gestalt means. Our Gestalt language learners aren't going to learn in that same way because their learning is just different. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a different way of processing language, a different way of learning language. So rather than picking up one word at a time, then two phrases, then simple sentences, they will just pick up the organized whole all at one time. So that's where you will see a kid who might say, "Hi, how are you?" But if you were to ask them to label one particular thing, one object, they might kind of struggle with that. Being able to break apart that gestalt, so that whole language, that could be a little bit challenging at first because they have learned the language all at once. So why do people kind of get a little bit like, "Oh, come on, Leah, what is with this gestalt?" So remember, gestalt is not a word that we made up for autism. This is a real word in the dictionary. It's been around for a long time. So some people might say, okay, well, let's think about the terms. Isn't that just a script? Aren't they just echoing what they've heard? And the fact of the matter is, maybe they are. They could be echoing. Call it echoed language learning. If you want to call it script language learning, personally, I don't really care what you call it. It's more important to understand that this is actually how the child is learning, that they are not learning the same way as their neurotypical counterparts, that our autistic children are actually learning just in a different way. So they're going to pick up these big scripts all at once. And at first, they might only use them in very specific ways. So let's take B. This is just like their neurotypical counterparts for a child who either under or over generalizes. When kids are first learning language, they do what's called under generalizing and over generalizing. So for example, a child who thinks that only their dog can be called a dog, that's under generalization. So the word dog can only be used for my dog. That's really restricted. That's your neurotypical development. That happens with loads of kids. Versus overgeneralization, every animal with four legs now must be a dog because I have a dog, I have an animal with four legs, we call it a dog at home, so now everything is called that. Again, we're not really processing exactly what the word is used for, and this is part of neurotypical development. So here's where I'm gonna challenge you and just ask you a question. Why would we accept over and under generalization from our neurotypical population, but for whatever reason, we're seeing some pushback on under or over generalization of a script from our neurospicy population? Just kind of let that sink in for a second, right? So essentially what is happening is people are saying we should ignore the script, or we should not pay attention to the echo or the gestalt or whatever you want to call it. Again, I don't really care. Call it what you want. It's still a whole phrase learning. So there's a lot of push to kind of just ignore that. But I'm going to challenge that because why do we ignore it in a neurospicy kid, but we don't ignore it in a neurotypical kid? So let that kind of sink in. Because essentially when you ignore a script or you ignore an echo or a gestalt, whatever we're calling it, you are essentially saying the way that you learn language, the way that you process language is not the norm. It's not typical. It's not normal. And so therefore, we're going to ignore you. We're going to ignore your voice. We're going to ignore what you have to say. And we're going to force you to learn in a completely different way. We would never do this to a neurotypical kid. So a neurotypical kid who is learning language, maybe they're learning multiple languages at the same time, or maybe they learn language, that maybe they have more verbs at first than maybe their neurotypical counterpart. No one would come back and say verbs. You have to slow down on the verbs. That's ludicrous. We would never say that. So why is it, just ask yourself this, why is it that we're picking apart our neurospicy kids and we're saying, you can't learn language in the way that makes sense to you. You have to learn language in the way that makes sense to us. but we would never do this to our neurotypical kids. So sorry, that was a little soapboxy, but I just want us to have some food for thought, right? Just think about that for just a minute, because I want us to really appreciate that every child learns language differently. Yes, we have tons of kids who are going to learn one word at a time, then 2 words, then 3 words, and they're going to start forming sentences, then compound sentences, then compound complex sentences, and it's awesome, and they learn in that way. It is equally awesome that we have other kids who learn in whole phrases all at once. So their brain is just developing and just processing a different way. Their brain is just saying, I'm going to pick up on this a different way than what my neurotypical counterparts are going to pick up on it. And that's okay. But now what happens is people say like, okay, but how do I know, Leah? How do I know if it's just scripting for scripting purposes? It's echoing. What do I do with this script, this echo gestalt? What am I supposed to do with this? Because on the surface, and I'll give you this, for those of you who are extremely skeptical of this, I will give you this because I've worked with tons of autistic kids. On the surface, these scripts, echoes, gestalts, they oftentimes feel like they have no meaning. They oftentimes feel like they serve no purpose. But in the next part we're going to get into, what is the purpose? Why should we pay attention? And then what do we do about them? Because I am going to say this, and I could not be more sure of myself from research, from reading, from personal experience, all of these things combined. Scripts, echoes, gestalts always serve a purpose. There is a communicative purpose there in some form. And it is our job as the adults, therapists, parents, whoever you are, friends, sibling of that autistic individual, to figure out, what does that script mean and how do we help our autistic individual be successful? So I know I got a little soapboxy on this part, and maybe you don't agree, and that's fine. Ask me questions. I'm happy to answer them. But I want to now encourage us to look at, what do scripts, echoes, and gestalts mean, and how then do we use them to help our autistic individual be successful in a communication interaction. So what are we going to do about these scripts? So I want you to think, before we get into what are we going to do about these scripts, I'm going to challenge you once again and ask you a question. What would it feel like on a daily basis for you if someone constantly ignored your scripts? So you go into Starbucks tomorrow morning, you go in to order that grande soy no foam latte, and the barista looks at you and says, "Ooh, sorry, that's a script and we don't accept scripts here, so I'm gonna need you to say that a different way." What? Your mind would be blown. You would be like, are you kidding me? This script is so appropriate for this time. So that is just a silly example maybe, but I hope that kind of helps you think about, what would it feel like if someone ignored your scripts? If you said, "Hey, good morning, how are you?" and your colleague was like, "Sorry, script, we're gonna ignore that. I'm gonna need you to greet me in a spontaneous way. Let's change that language up. Can we alter the way you're saying that?" No, again, completely ludicrous. And so again, I want to continue to challenge us to say, like, why do we accept scripts in neurotypical people, but when a neurospicy kid says something that maybe on the surface we don't understand, we're like, "Oh, sorry, we're not going to accept that," rather than trying to figure out, what did you actually mean by that? All right. So when we hear this Gestalt language, or if you want to call it echo script, that's fine. We hear a kid use a whole phrase. And at first we might say, okay, the primary form of communication that this kid has is phrases, and I'm not really sure what these mean, but I'm going to take the time to dig in to try to figure out, what is the context in which the child is using this phrase? What is the situation? What was the antecedent? So what came before? What happened before this child said this phrase? Maybe what happened after if I didn't acknowledge the phrase, or what happened if I did this particular action? Did the child then accept that? And then we can say, oh, okay, so I think when they say this, they're asking me to do this. So for example, I'm gonna give you an example from a kid that I worked with years ago. And he used to love Elmo's World. And Elmo said in one of his shows, Elmo wants a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And so this kid picked up on that script, and he saw Elmo said, I want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. He got to eat. This kid began to use this script as a way to say, I'm hungry. I would like something to eat. P.S. also a script. Kids say this all the time. But what we had to learn as the adults in his life was that when the kid said, Elmo wants a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, that meant that he was telling us he was hungry and was ready to eat. So a perfect example of when a script is really, really useful for a particular child. Move away from that. So now we have a script. We're using this exact same wording or maybe tweaking it just a little bit in various situations. Now we can move on to the next stage where we can isolate certain pieces of the script and use parts of a script to help the child to explore and expand their vocabulary. So we say, okay, these are some words that you're using pretty regularly. You use these words together. So how do I take these words that you're already using together and expand upon those to give you something different? And then the next phase, which is really cool, now we're teaching our kid to generalize this. So we're expanding our phrases. We're not just expanding them with our mom and dad, or not just with our speech language pathologist, but with everybody. Still accepting scripts, because autistic individuals are going to use scripts for the rest of their lives. The same way that you, if you're neurotypical, you are going to use a script for the rest of your life. You are going to use scripts. And P.S., you're going to use echoes for the rest of your life. Any of my students that sit in my classroom will tell you, I use echoes all the time. Forget about it, right? That's an echo from a movie. I quote movies all the time. We quote movies as humans all the time. We quote poetry. We quote plays. How many times have you heard in your life, the lady doth protest too much, methinks? And maybe that one's a little weird one, but I literally heard someone say that last week, right? So I'm just saying, like, we need to think about the fact that we are echoing all the time, and we accept this as a funny, social, okay thing. And so you are going to be echoing. You are going to be echoing pop stars. You are going to be echoing slang and idioms, because we say idioms and slang a very specific way so that people are able to follow those idioms or slang. And then we learn how to adapt them in different ways. So the same, we're going to learn how to adapt and teach our autistic kids how to adapt their phrases. So we'll say, okay, we're going to let you use the script. We accept the script exactly in this situation. And then we're going to offer some other options. Really, really critical. Lean in for a second and listen closely. We do not ever force them to change the script or force them to use the script the way that we want the script to be used. That is not what we're looking to do. We're just offering other options of other ways the script could be used in order to provide more vocabulary for them. So if they choose to accept this and enhance, change, alter, whatever, that's their choice, not our choice. We don't get to tell them how to talk. So what are you going to do as a parent? What are you going to do as a therapist? Number one, get rid of your lesson plan. You are not doing clinician-directed therapy with an autistic child who is a Gestalt language learner. You're just not doing. It's not happening. It's just going to be the most unsuccessful therapy session ever. So get rid of it. You are going to be doing child-led. You let that child lead the session. You let that child let you know, what are we doing? What are we working towards? What is the language that we're going to process today? What is the language we're going to use today? And you are going to accept those scripts. You are going to accept those gestalts. You can offer some suggestions on different ways to use those scripts. And what's really important is, in order to help language growth, you offer more scripts. You provide more scripting, more echoes, more gestalts, and you say, here's another whole phrase that you could very easily use. A very awesome gestalt, a very awesome phrase that we use in lots of different scenarios. No thanks, I'm good. No thanks, I'm good. I use that phrase all the time. I can use that phrase with lots of different people and lots of different scenarios. So teaching our Gestalt language learners more phrases so that they can be successful across settings with lots of different people. This is really going to be helpful in therapy. Accepting the child for who they are meeting them where they're at, absolutely critical, never ignoring, always acknowledging, and then being able to say, can I maybe just have a silent session? Silence can be scary. We do not like it, but can we just sit in silence with our child and just say, I will embrace this silence. I will stop the questioning. I am absolutely not going to take over this session. I'm going to let you lead and you teach me. And when the child starts to talk, this gives them the freedom to express themselves in the way that they want to express themselves. Rather than being bombarded by questions, being told how to talk, being told how to say things, being told what is and isn't acceptable, we're saying, you know what? You do you, honey. I'm going to sit here in silence. I'm going to accept you as you are. I am going to let you lead the therapy session, and you're going to teach me today what are some of the phrases that are going to be successful for you, and then how can I then again figure out what they mean, help you generalize them, and then increase your use of various scripts to be a successful communicator across settings. There are loads of examples that I could give of other scripts that are really, really useful. But if we don't take the time to figure out what they mean, then we're not going to be able to help the child, and then it will become frustrating. Your child's going to get dysregulated. You might see some negative behaviors. You might see some hitting and some biting and some screaming. And then it's like, see, when the kid scripts, they just get mad. It's not when they script that they get mad. It's when you ignore the script that they get mad. When you ignore the gestalt, they're going to get mad. As you would too if you went in to order your coffee and your script was ignored or your gestalt was ignored. So I just want to encourage us, keep digging, figuring this out. So this happens, right? Our kids have mostly echoes. They're going to learn these huge phrases and we're going to say, I don't really know what these mean. We're going to take the time. We figure out what they mean. And that's kind of the first phase of learning. The next phase of learning, what we then can do is say, okay, this is a script. How can we use this script in more ways than one? So rather than only use this script in this particular situation, can this script actually be used successfully in another situation? Can we say these exact same words and actually get a completely different result? So teaching your child, hey, you can use that script, and guess what? You can use it in this situation, you can use it in this situation, and you can use it in this situation. And then accepting it, and then maybe even tweaking just a little tiny part, right? So a kid might say, Elmo wants a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And we could say, oh, Elmo might also want mac and cheese. Does Elmo want grilled cheese? Does Elmo want chicken nuggets? Does Elmo want, name a food your kid loves, whatever food it is. And just lean into that script, leaning in to say, I'm communicating with you, because a script is used on the surface at first simply as a way to communicate. The same way as a newborn baby makes all these crazy noises and we're like, oh, look, they're talking to me. No, they're not. That kid is not talking to you. That kid is making noises. But we respond as if they are talking to us, and therefore the child learns a back and forth communication. So an autistic child communicates with a script. We respond with some kind of spoken communication back, and we have taught a communication exchange. So then once we can kind of take that script and put it into different scenarios, we have helped the child learn. We don't have to just use this script in this one way. We can use this script in lots of different ways. And P.S., people can actually know what they mean. It's not so hidden of an understanding. And we can teach other people, what does this script mean? What is the child talking about? And help them to communicate successfully. All right, so let's wrap up with a question that I'm sure a lot of people have. Okay, Leah, but what about those scripts that we just can't figure out what they mean? Because sometimes we can't, because sometimes they're not communicating that I want to say something to you in the kind of traditional sense, but more they're communicating, P.S., I'm dysregulated, help or get away. So I have a client, and I've shared this with many, many people. I have a client that uses a script, that when my client uses this script, they say a very specific phrase. And every time they use that phrase, I know, ooh, I have pushed too hard. I have gone over, I have been way too clinician directed, and my child is now extremely dysregulated, or they're becoming extremely dysregulated. And so now I need to take a beat, I need to step back, and I need to acknowledge this. So as soon as I hear this particular script come out of my child's mouth, I actually will repeat the script back to my child, and I will say, "Ooh, sorry, buddy, do you need some squeezes, or do you need to take a scooter break?" And every single time, my kid will ask for squeezes, a scooter break, or some kind of way to help regulate. So scripting, if it doesn't mean I'm hungry, I want to play, I want this, I want that, if it's not kind of your traditional language exchange, it is still a communication exchange, because it can still communicate. P.S. I'm dysregulated. I'm trying to regulate myself, but if you keep pushing and if you keep questioning, this is going to be a big old mess. So our child's gestalts can mean, I need your help with something, I need your attention, I want to have a conversation back and forth, and they can equally mean back off or please help me to continue to regulate myself. So again, pinpointing, they are communicative in some way, and it is our job as the adult in their life to help them figure out, like, oh, okay, I understand what this means, and now I'm going to respond appropriately, whether that means I'm going to give you something to eat, or I'm going to give you something to drink, or we're just going to chat, or I'm going to back off and I'm going to let you script until you have re-regulated. Because we might not think so, but autistic kids can re-regulate themselves, and that scripting and that stimming. So if they're rocking, or they might be doing their hand flapping, or whatever it is that they're doing, that's self-regulation. Those are really amazing skills that our kids have that we need to not be ignoring. We're not telling them to have quiet hands and calm down, because they're self-regulating. And if we ask them to stop, they're going to continue to be dysregulated. Let's end on this note. I hope what I have said so far has been helpful. I hope you've learned something. So to wrap it up, all gestalts, scripts, echoes serve a purpose. They serve a communicative purpose in some way. It is our job to figure out what that purpose is. It is our job to help shape those if the child is interested in having them shaped. It is our job to provide more scripts and more opportunities, and to teach the child how can we use those echoes or scripts in lots and lots of different ways. And it is not our job to tell our Gestalt language learners that they need to learn like their neurotypical counterparts. The same way as we would never tell a neurotypical kid that they have to learn full scripts and we're not going to accept 1 or 2 word utterances, we will only accept whole word phrases. We would never do that. The same as we would never tell a child who uses ASL or a child who uses an AAC that we're not going to accept that, because that's a different way of learning language. Again, absolutely silly. We would never say it. So we need to be checking ourselves and making sure that we're not doing this to our autistic individuals. So accepting the child, being able to learn from that child to say, what can you teach me? What can I learn from you? And then being able to say, okay, and now how can I help? Same as I would help any other child. How can I help you grow your language, generalize your language, and continue to use your language more effectively? So I hope that this video helped. I know it's a bit lengthy. I hope you hung in there with me. Thanks for those of you who did. And I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, you want follow-up videos, any more information, I'm happy to send it to you. I'm happy to make more. Just let me know. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.